In recent years, a narrative of organized childcare fraud has swept through state houses across the country. Much of this panic stems from a high-profile $300 million federal fraud case out of Minnesota. Ohio lawmakers responded to this national anxiety by drafting House Bill 647. Sponsors framed the legislation as a strict crackdown, authorizing a $5 million automated data analytics system to track provider attendance. But the people running Ohio's daycares describe a different reality. Childcare providers warn that this bill will actually destroy their businesses. Administrative data compiled under Governor Mike DeWine shows the actual scale of the problem. Out of the 5,200 licensed childcare centers operating last year, the state closed exactly 12 for fraud. Mapped against every center, those 12 closures represent a fraud rate of exactly 0.23%. If systemic fraud is statistically non-existent in Ohio, what is House Bill 647 actually designed to do? The state's official fiscal note for the bill acknowledges that eliminating enrollment-based payments will reduce publicly funded childcare, or PFCC, costs by tens of millions of dollars annually. PFCC is the state's subsidy program that helps low-income families afford childcare. This chart compares the payment structures. Centers have fixed monthly costs, like salaries and rent. Under an attendance-based model, the state docks pay when a child misses a day, pushing revenue below costs. Enrollment-based models pay a flat rate, keeping the business stable. Under existing state law, Ohio was bound to transition to the stable enrollment-based model by 2028. This move would have aligned Ohio with federal recommendations and 24 other states that already use it. House Bill 647 permanently eliminates that 2028 transition deadline, trapping providers in the volatile attendance model indefinitely. The legislation functions as a state cost-cutting measure. The government saves tens of millions of dollars on the backs of struggling childcare providers, while framing the policy as fraud prevention. To enforce this strict attendance tracking, the state plans to deploy a punitive algorithmic surveillance system. The legislation introduces a low evidentiary standard. It allows the Department of Children and Youth to instantly suspend a provider's license and withhold earned money based merely on a reason to suspect fraud. Not proven fraud, just suspicion. Furthermore, the bill explicitly strips providers of all legal recourse. It declares that these administrative suspensions and overpayment determinations are final and not subject to any appeal or hearing. Stripping a business of its operating license and earned funds without a prior hearing directly violates the 14th Amendment and established due process frameworks. Beyond the legal violations, this strict attendance tracking creates physical dangers for children, forcing providers into an impossible choice during severe weather events. If a blizzard hits Ohio and public schools close for safety, a child care center that also closes loses its state funding for that day. For many fragile businesses, that loss risks immediate bankruptcy. If the provider stays open just to survive financially, they assume liability. If a child is injured in hazardous conditions, the center risks a negligence lawsuit for operating when schools determined it was unsafe. The bill constructs a structural conflict of interest. It forces childcare providers to choose between their own financial survival and the physical safety of the children they serve. The broader landscape of Ohio's childcare industry reveals why providers are so vulnerable to these cuts. Since 2020, 382 daycares in Ohio have permanently shut their doors. 55% of the state's surviving providers are currently operating at a loss. This is driven by state reimbursement rates that sit at the absolute bottom of national market scales. This chart tracks a failure of state management. The descending line represents over $500 million in federal stabilization funds. Ohio allowed this money to expire unspent, while the climbing red line shows the simultaneous surge in permanent provider closures. Critics argue that House Bill 647 is a political tool, designed to shift the blame for the industry's collapse away from the state's underfunding and onto the providers themselves. By framing these essential workers as suspects who require aggressive surveillance, the state creates a smokescreen for its own administrative and financial failures. If House Bill 647 passes, it will not fix a fraud crisis that the data shows does not exist. It will simply accelerate the collapse of the childcare industry, leaving hundreds of thousands of working Ohio families with nowhere to turn.